It is a peculiarity of English society that our most treasured ceremonies invariably attract our most dangerous impulses. I had occasion to reflect upon this uncomfortable truth as I stood in the magnificent ballroom of Thornfield Park on that crisp October evening, watching the cream of Hampshire society celebrate what should have been the wedding triumph of the season. Instead, I found myself witness to a theft so audacious, so perfectly timed, that it transformed a gathering of England's most respectable families into a collection of suspects, each harboring secrets that would have made their ancestors turn in their carefully tended graves. The occasion was the wedding of Miss Vivian Ashworth to Mr. Reginald Pemberton, a union that promised to merge two of the county's most distinguished bloodlines. Captain Hastings, for that is myself, had been invited through my connection with Colonel Ashworth, Vivian's uncle, who had served with distinction in my old regiment. "You'll find it amusing, Hastings," he had assured me over brandy at his club. "All the old families will be there, and Mother has decided to bring out the Ashworth emeralds for the occasion. Haven't been seen in public for a generation." The Ashworth emeralds. Even the name carried weight in certain circles. The necklace was a thing of legend. 7 perfectly matched Colombian stones, set in gold so pure it seemed to glow with its own light. The centerpiece a magnificent emerald known as the Serpent's Eye, for the way its depths seemed to shift and coil in candlelight. The piece had adorned Ashworth brides for 2 centuries, surviving wars, scandals, and the occasional family bankruptcy through the simple expedient of being too precious to sell and too beautiful to ignore. I had arrived at Thornfield Park as the afternoon shadows were lengthening, my motor crunching up the gravel drive between ancient oaks that had witnessed more history than most of us care to remember. The house itself was a testament to Georgian elegance, all balanced proportions and understated grandeur, the sort of place where even the servants possessed better breeding than most of London's nouveau riches. The wedding ceremony had concluded without incident in the village church, and now the reception was in full flourish. The ballroom blazed with the light of 3 crystal chandeliers, their brilliance reflecting off silk gowns and diamond tiaras, in a display that would have impressed Versailles. A string quartet played discreetly from an alcove draped in white roses, while uniformed footmen circulated with champagne that sparkled like liquid starlight. Yet even amidst such carefully orchestrated splendor, I found my attention drawn to the undercurrents of tension that seemed to eddy beneath the polished surface. There was something in the way certain guests avoided each other's eyes, in the brittle quality of some laughter, in the manner certain conversations ceased abruptly when others approached. The bride herself was radiant, as brides should be, but I noticed how her hand occasionally fluttered to her throat where the famous necklace should have rested. "Mother Ashworth insisted on waiting until the formal presentation," she had explained to a curious aunt. "The emeralds are to be revealed at precisely 9 o'clock when the dancing begins. It's tradition." Mrs. Cordelia Ashworth, the family matriarch, presided over the gathering with the imperious grace of a woman accustomed to having her smallest wishes treated as divine commandments. Tall, silver-haired, with eyes like winter frost, she moved through the crowd, dispensing approval and disapproval with equal precision. Beside her, the groom's mother, Mrs. Pemberton, seemed perpetually flustered, as if she had never quite recovered from the shock of her son marrying so far above his station. I observed the other principal players with the idle curiosity of a man with nothing better to do than study his fellow creatures. There was Dr. Marcus Whitfield, the family physician, a nervous little man who kept consulting his pocket watch as if time itself were a patient requiring constant monitoring. Miss Catherine Ashworth, the bride's cousin and closest companion, possessed the sharp intelligence of a woman who had learned early that beauty fades, but wit endures. Mr. James Thornfield, our host and the bride's godfather, carried himself with the careful dignity of a man whose fortune had been made in trade, but whose aspirations lay firmly in the realm of respectability. Most intriguing was the Honorable Sebastian Crane, a London art dealer whose presence seemed to make several guests distinctly uncomfortable. He was a man of perhaps 40 with the sort of polished charm that suggested either exceptional breeding or exceptional practice at deception. His eyes, I noted, had an unfortunate habit of cataloguing the value of everything they encountered. As 9 o'clock approached, the anticipation in the room became almost palpable. Mrs. Ashworth had positioned herself near a small table draped in white silk, upon which rested an ornate mahogany box bearing the Ashworth coat of arms. The family solicitor, Mr. Weatherby, stood beside her with the ceremonial key, his face bearing the solemn expression of a man about to perform a sacred ritual. The string quartet concluded their piece with a flourish, and Mrs. Ashworth raised her hand for silence. "My dear friends," she began, her voice carrying easily across the suddenly hushed ballroom, "it is my great pleasure to continue a tradition that has blessed Ashworth brides for 8 generations. The Ashworth emeralds have witnessed the joy of countless weddings, and tonight they shall grace our beloved Vivian as she begins her new life." She nodded to Mr. Weatherby, who inserted the key with practiced precision. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the expectant silence. Mrs. Ashworth lifted the lid with ceremonial gravity, then stepped back so that her guests might witness the revelation of the legendary gems. The collective gasp that arose from the assembled company was not one of admiration, but of horror. The box, lined with ivory silk that should have cradled priceless emeralds, lay empty save for a single item that made my blood run cold. A small card bearing a message in elegant script. "The serpent has shed its skin. Truth will follow shortly. A friend." For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, no one moved. Mrs. Ashworth stared into the empty box as if her gaze alone could conjure the missing necklace. The bride's face had gone chalk white, while her new husband's expression cycled rapidly through confusion, anger, and something that looked remarkably like fear. It was Dr. Whitfield who broke the spell, his voice cracking slightly as he said, "Good God, Cordelia, where are they?" "They were here," Mrs. Ashworth replied, her voice carrying a note of bewilderment that I had never expected to hear from such a formidable woman. "I checked the box myself not 2 hours ago. The emeralds were there, exactly as they should be." "Then someone has taken them," announced Mr. Crane with the sort of obvious observation that somehow makes a situation worse rather than better. "Impossible," declared Mr. Weatherby, his legal mind rejecting any scenario that suggested his security measures had failed. "The box has been under constant supervision. I've had it in my sight the entire evening." "Except when you went to fetch champagne," Miss Catherine observed quietly, "and when you stepped outside for air, and when you were deep in conversation with the vicar about the new church roof." The solicitor's face flushed crimson. "I was never gone for more than a few minutes at a time, and the box was always in a room full of people." "People," repeated Mrs. Ashworth, and suddenly her gaze swept across the assembled guests with new and terrible purpose. "Yes, indeed. People who knew the emeralds would be displayed tonight. People who had ample opportunity to observe our arrangements. People who—" She did not finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Someone in this room, someone who had shared their table, drunk their champagne and offered congratulations to the happy couple, was a thief. "We must search everyone," declared Mr. Pemberton, the groom's father, his face red with indignation. "No one leaves until we find those emeralds." "Indeed not," agreed Mrs. Ashworth, her voice now carrying the steel that had made her feared in 3 counties. "James, please instruct your staff to secure all exits. No one enters or leaves Thornfield Park until this matter is resolved." As our host moved to comply, I found myself studying the faces around me with new interest. The shock appeared genuine enough, but I had learned during my years with Poirot that the guilty often display the most convincing surprise. Someone in this room possessed nerves of steel and a talent for deception that would have impressed the Belgian master himself. The bride had begun to weep silently, great tears rolling down her cheeks as the magnitude of the disaster became clear. Her new husband attempted to comfort her, but his own distress was evident in the tremor of his hands and the pallor of his complexion. "Perhaps," suggested the vicar hopefully, "the emeralds have simply been mislaid. These old houses have so many hiding places, and in all the excitement of the day—" "The Ashworth emeralds," Mrs. Ashworth informed him with icy precision, "are not the sort of trinkets one misplaces like a pair of gloves. They are worth more than most people earn in a lifetime, and they have been stolen by someone who knew exactly what they were doing." As if summoned by the gravity of her words, the butler appeared at her elbow. "Madam," he murmured discreetly, "I have secured the house as requested. Shall I telephone for the police?" Mrs. Ashworth considered this for a moment, her calculating gaze once again sweeping the assembled company. "Not yet, Jameson. First, I believe we should give our thief an opportunity to return what they have taken. After all, we are all civilized people here." The silence that followed was pregnant with unspoken accusations and barely contained fear. I found myself thinking of my friend Poirot, wishing desperately for his presence and his remarkable ability to see truth where others saw only confusion. The theft had been executed with a precision that spoke of careful planning and intimate knowledge of the family's arrangements. This was no crime of opportunity, but a calculated act of betrayal. As I studied the faces around me, each wearing expressions of shock, indignation, or carefully controlled panic, I realized that Mrs. Ashworth's assessment was entirely correct. The thief was indeed among us, hidden behind a mask of respectability and false concern. The game had begun, and somewhere in this elegant ballroom, a serpent waited to strike again. The wedding guests who had come to celebrate love and tradition now found themselves trapped in a web of suspicion and deceit. And as the grandfather clock in the corner chimed the quarter hour, I could not shake the feeling that the theft of the emeralds was merely the opening gambit in a much more dangerous game, one that would require all of Hercule Poirot's legendary skills to resolve before the night was through. The ballroom, moments before so full of laughter and music, had become a crucible of suspicion. The guests, now prisoners of circumstance, clustered in uneasy knots or stood alone, their faces caught between outrage and anxiety. The hush was brittle. Every whispered conversation, every sidelong glance, seemed charged with accusation. It was a spectacle of British composure strained to its very limit. Mrs. Ashworth, steely and unyielding, wasted no time. She dispatched Mr. Thornfield to lock every door and instructed the staff to remain in the main hall under the watchful eyes of the guests. "No one leaves until this matter is settled," she declared. The musicians, dismissed, vanished like a memory, and the household sense of order hung by the thinnest thread. I, Hastings, found myself scanning the room, ostensibly for comfort, but truly for the telling gestures that betray the soul. Dr. Whitfield tried to marshal the staff, his voice brisk yet quivering, eyes darting to his watch as if time itself might absolve him. Miss Catherine Ashworth, sharp and composed, offered comfort to Vivian, the bride, but her gaze was never still. She missed nothing, and when our eyes met, I detected in her expression a wary intelligence. Sebastian Crane, that enigmatic art dealer, basked in his own detachment, swirling his brandy with a languid wrist, offering witticisms that fell flat in the tense air. Yet his eyes returned again and again to the empty box and the note, a connoisseur's curiosity or something more. Meanwhile, Mr. Thornfield did his best to restore order, murmuring apologies and instructions, but there was a haunted look in his eyes, the agony of a host whose perfect evening had collapsed. The Pembertons huddled together. Mrs. Pemberton, overwrought, whispered of ruination and scandal, while her husband bristled, eyes darting from face to face, as if weighing the cost of each acquaintance. The vicar, too gentle for such affairs, clung to desperate optimism, Perhaps the emeralds were merely misplaced. Perhaps it was all a mistake. But the room knew, in its marrow, that this was no accident. Mrs. Ashworth summoned me aside. In a voice crisp with command, she asked after my friend, the Belgian, and bade me contact him at once. I hurried to the telephone in the anteroom, enduring the torpor of the village exchange, until, at last, Hercule Poirot's unmistakable voice came through, warm yet precise. I explained the situation. He asked 3 questions: the time, the note, and whether the box had been left alone. "Touch nothing," he instructed. "I come, mon ami. Prevent the police from making the mud." Returning to the shifting assembly, I found the guests gathered in the library, summoned by Mrs. Ashworth's iron will. Here, amid old portraits and the scent of leather, the circle was drawn. Mrs. Ashworth herself, the newlyweds, the Pembertons, Dr. Whitfield, Miss Catherine, Mr. Thornfield, Crane, the vicar, Colonel Ashworth, the butler Jameson, and young Henry the footman, pale and fidgeting at the door. Mrs. Ashworth demanded the key from Mr. Weatherby, the solicitor, who produced it with trembling hands. "No duplicate exists," he insisted. "I brought it from the bank myself. It has not left my person." Catherine, voice soft but gaze unyielding, noted his absences. "A man must breathe," Weatherby retorted, red-faced. Crane, ever the observer, mused aloud about the card's wording. "Serpent's eye," "shedding skin." Phrases familiar to an art dealer's world, he claimed, perhaps a provocation or a plea for absolution. Dr. Whitfield, polishing his glasses, protested his innocence with a haste that did him no favors. The colonel snorted, hinting at debts and indiscretions. Reginald, the groom, stiffened with affront, while Vivian whispered, "It is my fault. I wanted the emeralds to mean something again." Jameson admitted to leaving the box only once, for kitchen business, with Henry left in charge. Henry stammered that Mrs. Pemberton had dispatched him for more ices. Gone not 5 minutes. The web of opportunity began to tighten. Every absence, every errand, was now a possible thread in the tapestry of deceit. It was then, with the storm of suspicion at its height, that Poirot arrived. He entered the library as if drawn upon rails of his own design, immaculate, composed, his presence alone stilling the room. He bowed with precision, acknowledging each guest in turn, his eyes already cataloguing the smallest gestures. "Order, mes amis," he said, his voice both gentle and commanding. "Let us commence with the facts. Madame Ashworth, if you please, recount for me, with the greatest accuracy, all that transpired from the last moment you saw the emeralds to this moment of discovery. Details, however small, are the friends of truth." The guests, their masks slipping in the presence of his scrutiny, braced themselves. The first round of the true game had begun, and with Poirot in command, not the smallest detail would remain hidden for long. Hercule Poirot surveyed the assembled company with the measured gaze of a general reviewing troops before battle. With characteristic precision, he arranged chairs in a perfect semicircle facing the fireplace, adjusting each until the spacing satisfied his exacting standards. Only when this ritual was complete did he invite Mrs. Ashworth to occupy the position of honor, her ramrod posture and steel-gray eyes commanding respect even in her distress. "Madame," he began, his voice carrying the gentle authority that had unraveled countless mysteries, "I require from you the most precise account possible. From the last moment you observed the emeralds in their proper place to the discovery of their absence, every detail, however small it may appear." Mrs. Ashworth's recitation was delivered with military precision. At 7 o'clock exactly, I unlocked the mahogany box in my private chambers. The Ashworth emeralds were perfect, every stone secure in its setting, the serpent's eye gleaming with its characteristic fire. I examined the clasp mechanism, tested the chain's weight, then locked the box and carried it personally to the anteroom adjacent to the ballroom. She paused, her fingers unconsciously touching her throat where the necklace should have rested. At 7:30, I entrusted both box and key to Mr. Weatherby with strict instructions that neither should leave his sight until the appointed hour of 9 o'clock. Poirot's pale green eyes shifted to the solicitor, whose complexion had acquired an unfortunate resemblance to parchment. "Monsieur Weatherby, you accept this sacred trust. Tell to me now, with the same precision as Madame Ashworth, your movements from that moment until the discovery." The solicitor dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief that had seen considerable use throughout the evening. I placed the box on the designated table in the anteroom, exactly as Mrs. Ashworth instructed. I remained vigilant, save for— His voice faltered as he encountered Poirot's unwavering stare. "Save for—" The Belgian's tone held no judgment, merely infinite patience. 3 brief occasions. Weatherby admitted miserably. At 8 o'clock the room had become insufferably warm, and I stepped onto the terrace for air. 5 minutes at most. Then, at 8:20, I fetched champagne from the main ballroom when the footman was delayed. Again, no more than 5 minutes. Finally, at 8:45, the vicar engaged me in conversation about the church restoration fund. Miss Catherine Ashworth's voice cut through his explanation like a blade through silk. "You're omitting the incident with Mrs. Pemberton's fan, Mr. Weatherby. She dropped it quite near the table during your conversation with the vicar, and you gallantly retrieved it for her." Mrs. Pemberton flushed crimson to the roots of her carefully arranged hair. "It was merely a moment. I was standing close to the table when I bent to retrieve my fan. How could I have known such a trifling incident would matter?" Poirot's attention sharpened with the focus of a microscope finding its subject. "Ah, madame, you approached the table during this critical time. You were alone in this endeavor." "Not precisely alone," Mrs. Pemberton stammered, her composure cracking. "My husband was nearby, discussing investments with Dr. Whitfield, and young Henry was attending to the flower arrangements on the side table." The pale footman stepped forward with visible reluctance. "I was checking the champagne service, sir. Mrs. Thornfield had instructed me to ensure proper chilling, but then Mrs. Pemberton required assistance. She sent me to fetch additional ices from the kitchen. Lemon ices, specifically." Poirot made a small notation in his leather notebook, his expression revealing nothing. "Lemon," he repeated softly. "How very specific. And you were absent how long, mon brave?" "Scarcely a minute, Monsieur Poirot. I ran the entire way." Dr. Whitfield cleared his throat with obvious discomfort. "I can confirm Mr. Pemberton's presence during the period in question. We were indeed discussing his portfolio, most disappointing returns this quarter, though I did step away briefly to attend Miss Catherine, who complained of feeling faint." "A momentary dizzy spell only," Catherine clarified, her intelligent eyes never leaving Poirot's face. "The excitement of the evening, perhaps. Dr. Whitfield was most solicitous." The Belgian detective absorbed this information with the methodical patience of a clockmaker examining intricate gears. "And you, Monsieur Crane, your movements during these critical moments?" Sebastian Crane's smile remained urbane, untroubled. "I spent most of the evening in the main ballroom, admiring our host's impressive collection. I did venture into the anteroom once, around 8:30, to pay my respects to Mrs. Ashworth and inquire about the emerald's history. Professional curiosity, you understand. The Portuguese provenance from 1823 is quite fascinating." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Mrs. Ashworth's expression grew arctic. "I discussed no such details with you, Mr. Crane. The emerald's provenance is not a matter for casual conversation with strangers." An uncomfortable silence settled over the assembly as Crane's urbane mask slipped perceptibly. "Perhaps I am mistaken about our conversation," he said smoothly. "The evening has been most eventful." Poirot made another careful notation, his expression giving nothing away. He approached the empty mahogany box, examining it with the intensity of a surgeon studying a patient. Lifting the cryptic card between 2 fingers, he studied it in the lamplight. The serpent has shed its skin. Truth will follow shortly. A friend, he quoted softly. It is curious, is it not, how the criminal mind cannot resist the theatrical gesture. This is not the work of a common thief seeking profit, mes amis. No, this is the work of someone who wishes to teach a lesson, to reveal a truth that has long been hidden. He turned to face the assembled suspects, his gaze moving methodically from face to face. I observe much in your testimonies. Too many absences, too many coincidences, too many small details that do not align. The box was guarded, oui, but by guardians who found many reasons to abandon their posts, and always at moments when others happened to require assistance or refreshment or medical attention. The grandfather clock chimed the half-hour, its resonant tones emphasizing the weight of Poirot's words. Tomorrow, I shall require individual interviews with each of you. Tonight, however, I suggest you all consider very carefully what truths you have not yet shared. For the serpent has indeed shed its skin, and what emerges may surprise you all. As the company began to disperse, murmuring uneasily among themselves, Poirot remained by the empty box, his fingers steepled in contemplation. The game had begun in earnest, and already the careful lies were beginning to unravel under the pressure of his methodical scrutiny. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Thornfield Park, with the pale clarity that follows a night of revelations. I found Poirot in the morning room at precisely 8 o'clock, already impeccably groomed and studying his leather notebook with the intensity of a general reviewing battle plans. Before him lay a cup of tisane, untouched and growing cold, a sure sign that his mind was fully engaged with the complexities of human nature. "Ah, Hastings," he greeted me without lifting his eyes from the page. "You observe, I trust, how the household moves this morning. The servants speak in whispers, the guests avoid each other's eyes, and our host paces the corridors like a man pursued by his own conscience. It is most instructive." Indeed, the atmosphere had grown thick with unspoken accusations. At breakfast, conversation had been stilted and sparse, each guest seemingly lost in private calculations of guilt and innocence. Mrs. Ashworth presided with her usual iron composure, but I detected a tremor in her voice when she inquired about the Morning Post. "Today," Poirot announced, closing his notebook with a decisive snap, "we begin the true investigation. The preliminary gathering of facts is complete. Now we must examine the psychology, the motivations, the fears that drive ordinary people to extraordinary acts." He arranged 2 chairs in the morning room with mathematical precision, positioning them to catch the light from the east-facing windows. "We commence with Monsieur Weatherby, the guardian who guarded so poorly. When a thing is entrusted to protection, Hastings, it is often the protector who provides the opportunity for its loss." The solicitor arrived promptly, his usual professional bearing somewhat diminished by a night of sleepless worry. Poirot gestured him to the chair facing the window, where the morning light would illuminate every flicker of expression. "Monsieur Weatherby, you have had time to reflect upon yesterday's events. Perhaps you recall additional details." Weatherby's hands trembled slightly as he produced the key from his waistcoat. "I have examined my conscience thoroughly, Monsieur Poirot. I cannot escape the conclusion that my negligence contributed to this disaster." Negligence, perhaps, but was it mere carelessness or something more deliberate? Poirot's pale green eyes studied the man with scientific precision. "You speak of duty, of responsibility, yet you abandoned your post repeatedly. For air, for champagne, for charitable conversation about church roofs. Tell me, what did you fear more? The theft of the emeralds or the displeasure of Madame Ashworth?" The question struck home with devastating accuracy. Weatherby's face crumpled like paper in flame. "Her displeasure," he whispered. "God help me, I chose to be agreeable rather than vigilant." "Précisément, and in choosing to please, you created the very disaster you sought to prevent." Mrs. Pemberton followed, entering with the dignity of a woman performing before an invisible audience. She repeated her account of the dropped fan, the request for ices, the innocent proximity to the fateful box. But Poirot's gentle questioning revealed layers beneath her protestations. "Madame, your son marries magnificently above his station. Your pride is considerable, but your anxiety is greater still. What was it you truly feared might occur?" Her composure cracked like ice under pressure. I feared someone might question whether Reginald was worthy of such a bride, whether our family deserved such an honor. And so you hovered near the emeralds, the symbol of that honor, ready to defend what you felt was threatened. "I wanted everything to be perfect," she said desperately, "for the evening to proceed without incident, without scandal." Poirot's expression grew thoughtful. "Yet sometimes, madame, the very effort to prevent scandal creates it." Miss Catherine Ashworth entered next, her intelligent eyes alert and measuring. Unlike the previous subjects, she showed no nervousness, no defensive posturing. She settled into the chair with the composed grace of a woman accustomed to managing difficult situations. "You wish to ask about my observation of Mr. Weatherby's movements," she said, forestalling his first question. "I make it a habit to notice details, Monsieur Poirot. In my experience, people reveal more through their actions than their words." "Wise indeed, mademoiselle. And your own actions last evening? The sudden faintness that required Dr. Whitfield's attention? A momentary weakness only. The heat, the excitement, perhaps a touch of irony at witnessing such devotion to material symbols." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You speak with some bitterness of symbols, of material concerns. Has experience taught you to distrust such things?" For the first time, Catherine's composure flickered. "Experience teaches many lessons, monsieur, not all of them pleasant." When Dr. Whitfield appeared, his nervous energy was immediately apparent in the way his hands constantly sought his pocket watch. Poirot observed this tick with particular interest. "Doctor, you have served the Ashworth family faithfully for many years. You understand their ways, their values, their vulnerabilities." "I serve as physician, nothing more," Whitfield replied stiffly. "Yet a physician sees much, no? The private moments, the family tensions, the secrets that illness reveals." Poirot's voice remained gentle, but his gaze was penetrating. "When Mademoiselle Catherine required your attention last evening, was it truly a medical emergency?" The doctor's face flushed crimson. "Miss Catherine that is to say, she has been under considerable strain lately. One cannot help but notice when a person of such quality suffers from circumstances beyond her control." "Ah," Poirot murmured, making a note. "You speak as one who cares deeply for his patient's welfare." Sebastian Crane's interview proved most illuminating. The art dealer maintained his urbane composure, but Poirot's questions about his knowledge of the emerald's provenance clearly unsettled him. "You mentioned Portuguese origins, the year 1823, details that Madame Ashworth insists she never discussed with you. How do you account for this knowledge?" Crane's smile grew strained. "Perhaps I confused it with another piece. The art world is full of such historical details." "Indeed. And the phrase in the note, 'The serpent has shed its skin,' does this suggest anything to your professional mind?" "Merely a dramatic flourish, I should think." "No, monsieur. It suggests transformation, the casting off of an old identity to reveal a new truth beneath. Most specific, most deliberate." As the morning progressed, Poirot's understanding of the crime's true nature became increasingly clear. This was not the work of a common thief seeking profit, but something far more complex. A carefully orchestrated revelation designed to expose hidden truths and force long-suppressed secrets into the light. When the final interview concluded, Poirot sat in contemplative silence, his fingers steepled before him. "You perceive, Hastings, how the pattern emerges. Each alibi contains one broken thread. Each motive is respectable until examined closely. But most significant is the note itself. It is not the voice of greed, but of conscience. He rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the manicured grounds where peacocks strutted with imperial dignity. This theft, mon ami, is not theft at all in the conventional sense. It is a moral lesson, a psychological drama staged by someone who believes that truth, like the serpent's new skin, must be revealed regardless of the pain it causes. The grandfather clock chimed the noon hour, and Poirot straightened his tie with characteristic precision. "Come, Hastings. The afternoon will bring new revelations, for our thief is not finished with their performance. The serpent has indeed shed its skin, and what emerges next will surprise us all." The afternoon brought a peculiar stillness to Thornfield Park, as if the very walls held their breath in anticipation of further revelations. Poirot had spent the early hours in what he termed the reconstruction of truth, methodically examining the anteroom where the theft had occurred. With his characteristic precision, he positioned himself at the table where the mahogany box had rested, his pale green eyes cataloguing every detail that others had overlooked. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured, running his gloved fingers across a faint scratch on the polished wood. "This mark speaks of haste, of a box opened with trembling hands rather than ceremonial care." He examined the empty container itself with the intensity of a surgeon studying a patient, noting the perfect indentation where the serpent's eye had rested. Our thief knew precisely what they sought, and more importantly, what message they wished to convey. Our contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Frobisher from the market town, a square, practical man whose disapproval of theatrical mysteries was evident in every gesture. "Right then," he announced briskly. "We'll have a proper search. Evidence doesn't lie, whatever fancy theories might suggest." Mrs. Ashworth granted permission with a curt nod, and the systematic examination began. It was in Sebastian Crane's suite that the discoveries proved most damning. A jeweler's loop lay alongside paste emeralds in a lacquered case, while a velvet roll bore 7 oval recesses, the perfect dimensions for the stolen necklace. Most incriminating was a letter from a London dealer, speaking in guarded terms of an eager buyer for the Ashworth piece, if it could be secured discreetly. Crane's urbane composure cracked, but did not shatter entirely. "I am a dealer in fine objects," he protested. "Paste stones are tools of my trade. The velvet roll was cut for a Portuguese piece 2 years past. As for the letter, I received many such inquiries." "Your interest in the emeralds was keen enough last evening," Miss Catherine observed, her intelligent eyes never leaving his face. Inspector Frobisher's satisfaction was evident as he produced the final piece of evidence, cream-colored notepaper identical to that bearing the mysterious message. There we have it, plain as day: motive, means, and opportunity. Yet Poirot remained unmoved by this apparent resolution. "And yet, Inspector, our criminal possesses the soul of a dramatist. Would such a person carry both the stolen goods and the incriminating stationery? The note promises revelation, not profit, hardly the words of a common thief." As Frobisher prepared to take Crane into custody, young Henry the footman appeared in the doorway, his face pale as parchment. "Begging pardon, sir," he stammered to Jameson, "but there's been another note found." The second message, discovered in Mrs. Ashworth's private chambers while the household was distracted by the search, carried an even more ominous tone. "The first skin has been shed, but the serpent's true nature remains hidden. Look to those who guard secrets more precious than emeralds. The truth demands its price. A friend." The effect upon the assembled company was electric. Dr. Whitfield's hand moved instinctively to his throat, while Miss Catherine's expression grew calculating. Even Mrs. Ashworth's iron composure showed signs of strain as she realized that her most private sanctuary had been violated. "This is intolerable," declared Mr. Pemberton. We are being terrorized by some phantom who moves through the house at will." "On the contrary," Poirot replied quietly, "we deal with someone possessing intimate knowledge of this household's secrets. The placement of this note required not stealth, but belonging." It was then that Jameson delivered the most chilling revelation of all. "Madam," he addressed Mrs. Ashworth with obvious reluctance, "the key to the late master's safe has been taken from your chatelaine." Mrs. Ashworth's hand flew to her waist, confirming the butler's words. The small silver key that had resided there for decades was indeed missing. "The safe contains nothing of monetary value," she whispered, "merely old papers, documents." "Ah," Poirot interjected softly, "but to someone seeking truth rather than treasure, documents may prove far more valuable than emeralds." As Inspector Frobisher led the protesting Crane away, Poirot stood in contemplative silence. "You observe, Hastings, how we have captured the magpie, the collector of bright objects, while the true serpent remains hidden. This crime speaks not of greed, but of justice, not of theft, but of revelation." The afternoon shadows lengthened across Thornfield Park as the implications settled over the remaining guests like a shroud. Someone among them possessed secrets worth more than the legendary emeralds, and that someone had been patient enough to orchestrate this elaborate charade to bring those secrets to light. "The serpent sheds its skin," Poirot murmured, "but what emerges beneath may surprise us all. Our true adversary thinks in symbols, in ceremonies, in the dramatic revelation of long-buried truths. The game, mon ami, has only just begun." The grandfather clock chimed the hour, its resonant tones seeming to count down toward an inevitable reckoning that would test every carefully maintained facade in this house of secrets. The evening descended upon Thornfield Park with an oppressive weight that seemed to press against the very windows. Despite Inspector Frobisher's confident departure with Sebastian Crane in custody, an atmosphere of unresolved tension pervaded the house. The remaining wedding guests moved through the corridors like actors uncertain of their roles, while the servants whispered in corners about keys that vanished and safes that might reveal more than anyone wished to know. Poirot had positioned himself in the library, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of generations, yet focused entirely on the psychology of the present crisis. He sat motionless for nearly an hour, his pale green eyes fixed on some invisible point in space, his mind working through the intricate patterns of human motivation that lay beneath the surface of respectability. "The arrest of Monsieur Crane troubles you," I observed, settling into the chair opposite him. "Indeed, Hastings, it troubles me greatly, for it represents the very sort of obvious solution that blinds us to deeper truths." He opened his leather notebook and studied the careful notations he had made throughout the day. "Consider the evidence against our art dealer. Too perfect, too convenient, too readily discovered. Ezo Ambahitus, professional criminal, does not leave such a trail of breadcrumbs for the authorities to follow." Our contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Whitfield, who entered with the hesitant manner of a man approaching a confessional. His usual nervous energy seemed subdued, replaced by a heavy resignation that spoke of sleepless nights and troubled conscience. "Monsieur Poirot," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I must speak with you privately. There are matters concerning Miss Catherine that you should know." Poirot gestured to the chair, his expression encouraging yet penetrating. "Doctor, the burden of secrets weighs heavily upon the soul. Perhaps it is time to lighten that load." Whitfield's hands trembled as he removed his spectacles and began cleaning them with obsessive care. "Her condition yesterday evening was not merely the result of heat or excitement. She has been under tremendous strain, financial difficulties of the most serious nature. Her father's investments proved disastrous before his death, leaving debts that consumed nearly every penny of her inheritance. And you, as family physician, have been aware of this burden." "More than aware," Whitfield confessed miserably. "I have been assisting her in selling family possessions quietly, piece by piece, to maintain appearances. My knowledge of the family's valuables combined with certain connections in London, has proven useful in finding discreet buyers. Before Poirot could respond, a commotion arose in the entrance hall. We hurried to investigate, finding Mrs. Ashworth standing beside her private safe, her face a mask of controlled fury. "The safe has been opened," she announced, her voice carrying barely controlled rage. "The missing key was used during the dinner hour, while we were all occupied with Inspector Frobisher's theatrics." Jameson stood beside the violated strong-box, his professional composure cracked. "The lock shows no signs of forcing, madam. It was opened by someone who knew exactly what they sought." "What was taken?" Poirot inquired, his voice cutting through the babble of confused voices. Mrs. Ashworth's expression grew arctic. "Documents, family papers of a sensitive nature. Nothing that would interest a common thief, but perhaps of great interest to someone seeking to expose family secrets." Poirot examined the safe with his characteristic precision, noting the position of remaining papers, the careful selection evident in what had been removed. "Our criminal is indeed a moralist, not a mere thief. The emeralds were merely the opening gambit, a dramatic gesture to focus attention while the true prize was secured." Miss Catherine appeared in the doorway, her intelligent eyes blazing with something between defiance and desperation. "Perhaps it is time we stopped pretending this family's reputation rests on anything more substantial than carefully maintained illusions." "Catherine!" Mrs. Ashworth's voice cracked like a whip, but her niece's gaze remained steady. Dr. Whitfield moved protectively to Catherine's side, his earlier nervousness replaced by fierce loyalty. "Miss Catherine has borne burdens that would crush lesser spirits. If someone seeks to expose our secrets, perhaps the time for concealment has passed." Poirot studied the assembled group with new understanding. The note spoke of serpents shedding their skin, of truth demanding its price. Our criminal seeks not wealth but revelation, not profit but justice. The question remains, whose justice and for what long-buried transgression? As the implications settled over the room like a shroud, Poirot's expression grew increasingly thoughtful. The theft of emeralds, the systematic exposure of family secrets, the careful timing of each revelation, all pointed to a mind that valued truth above profit, justice above mere gain. "Tomorrow," he announced quietly, "we shall discover what truth these stolen documents contain. For our serpent has shed its skin, and what emerges beneath may surprise us all." The grandfather clock chimed 9 o'clock, marking exactly 24 hours since the discovery of the theft. Yet instead of resolution, each revelation seemed to deepen the mystery, suggesting that the true crime lay not in what was taken, but in what had been hidden for far too long. Dawn broke grey and reluctant over Thornfield Park, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the pall of suspicion hanging over the household. I found Poirot in the morning room, already immaculately dressed despite the early hour, studying a telegram that had arrived with the first post. His expression was grave, his usual morning cheerfulness replaced by the focused intensity that marked his most serious investigations. "Hastings," he said without looking up, "our serpent grows bolder with each passing hour. This message arrived not 20 minutes ago." He handed me the telegram, its brevity making it all the more ominous. "Parish records examined. Stop interesting discrepancies noted. Stop full verification proceeding. Stop a friend." Before I could respond, young Henry appeared at the doorway, his face bearing the now familiar pallor of fresh shock. "Monsieur Poirot, sir," he stammered. "The vicar is here. Says it's most urgent, sir. Something about the church records." The Reverend Dr. Morrison entered in a state of considerable agitation, his usually composed demeanor thoroughly shattered. His clerical collar sat askew, and his hands trembled as he clutched a leather-bound volume to his chest. "Monsieur Poirot," he began breathlessly, "my vestry was broken into during the night, the lock forced, paper scattered everywhere, but only one thing was taken, a single page from the parish register." He opened the volume with reverent care, revealing a gap where a leaf had been carefully removed. The baptismal records from the summer of 1895, specifically the entries for July and August. Poirot's pale green eyes sharpened with interest. 1895, you say? And what significance might that particular period hold for the families gathered here? The vicar's discomfort was evident as his gaze flickered toward the door, as if expecting Mrs. Ashworth to materialize. That would be the year of Miss Catherine's birth, and he hesitated, then continued in a whisper, the year of certain irregularities in the family records that I had hoped never to revisit. Irregularities? Poirot prompted gently. Questions of legitimacy, of proper documentation. The late Mr. Ashworth was most insistent that certain entries be adjusted to reflect what he termed family dignity. I was a young curate then, easily intimidated by wealth and position. The implications hung in the air like incense, heavy and inescapable. Poirot made careful notes in his leather book, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. And was there, perhaps, a note left by our theatrical friend? The vicar produced a small card with obvious reluctance, pinned to the empty page with a brass tack. The familiar, elegant script read, "Truth recorded in God's house cannot be altered by man's pride. The serpent's true nature shall be revealed." A friend. We were interrupted by a commotion in the entrance hall. Mrs. Ashworth's voice, usually so controlled, carried a note of barely suppressed panic. "Search everywhere. It must be found." We hurried to investigate, finding the formidable matriarch standing in her private sitting room, her face ashen as she stared at an opened escritoire. Papers lay scattered across the Persian carpet, and a small drawer had been forced, its delicate lock splintered. "My personal correspondence," she said, her voice hollow with defeat. "Letters from my late husband's solicitor, documents regarding regarding family arrangements made before her birth." She turned to face us, and for the first time since our arrival, her iron composure cracked entirely. "They know everything now. Every shameful detail we've spent 30 years concealing." Dr. Whitfield, who had arrived with the other guests drawn by the disturbance, moved protectively toward Catherine. The young woman stood frozen, her intelligent eyes reflecting a terrible understanding of what these revelations might mean. "Aunt Cordelia," she said quietly, "perhaps it's time the truth was spoken. I've lived my entire life in the shadow of whispers and half-truths. If someone seeks to expose our family's secrets, perhaps we should face them with dignity rather than denial." Mrs. Ashworth's response was swift and sharp. "You don't understand what you're saying, child. The scandal would destroy not just you, but everyone connected to this family. The Pembertons, the wedding, everything we've worked to build." Poirot stepped forward, his presence immediately commanding attention. Mademoiselle, the truth has a way of emerging regardless of our wishes. Our mysterious friend has demonstrated remarkable patience and planning. The theft of the emeralds was merely the opening gambit, a theatrical gesture to focus attention while more significant prizes were secured. He gestured toward the scattered papers. First the emeralds, symbols of family pride. Then the safe documents, evidence of hidden shame. Now the parish records and personal correspondence, the very foundations of identity itself. This is not the work of a common criminal, but of someone who believes that justice long delayed must finally be served. Mr. Thornfield, who had been hovering nervously near the doorway, cleared his throat. If there are matters of delicate family history, perhaps they could be handled discreetly. I've long been a friend to this family, and my resources— Your resources, monsieur, cannot alter what has already been set in motion, Poirot replied with gentle firmness. Our serpent has shed the skin of anonymity and now moves openly, confident that the truth will serve their purposes better than concealment. As if summoned by his words, Jameson appeared with another telegram. Mrs. Ashworth read it with growing horror, her face becoming increasingly pale. "What is it, Aunt?" Catherine asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "A London newspaper," Mrs. Ashworth whispered. "They claim to have documentation of irregularities in our family history. They're threatening publication unless we provide a statement by tomorrow evening." The grandfather clock chimed the hour, its measured tones seeming to count down toward an inevitable reckoning. Poirot stood in contemplative silence, his gaze moving from face to face, cataloguing the fear, the guilt, the desperate hope for redemption that he saw there. "The serpent has indeed shed its skin," he said finally, "and what emerges is not the monster you feared, but the possibility of truth acknowledged and honor restored through honest confession. The question that remains, mes amis, is whether you will meet this revelation with courage or continue to flee from shadows that grow longer with each passing hour." As the morning light strengthened, illuminating the scattered papers and stricken faces, it became clear that the game had entered its final phase. The theft of emeralds had been transformed into something far more profound, a reckoning with the past that would determine not just the fate of the Ashworth family, but the very nature of truth itself. The serpent's coil was tightening, and soon there would be nowhere left to hide. The morning brought an oppressive stillness to Thornfield Park, as if the very house held its breath in anticipation of further revelations. The overnight threat of newspaper exposure had transformed the remaining wedding guests from mere suspects into desperate conspirators, each calculating the cost of their carefully guarded secrets. I found Poirot in the conservatory at dawn, arranging chairs with his characteristic precision, while exotic palms cast intricate shadows in the pale morning light. "Today, Hastings," he announced without preamble, "we shall witness the serpent's most delicate maneuver, the moment when truth and deception dance so closely together that even the participants cannot distinguish between them." His words proved prophetic. At precisely 9 o'clock, as the household gathered for what Mrs. Ashworth had grimly termed the morning reckoning, young Henry appeared with news that sent fresh shock waves through our already fractured company. "The emeralds, sir," he stammered to Jameson, his face pale with amazement. "They've been returned." We hurried to the anteroom where, upon the white-draped table, the familiar mahogany box sat open like a mouth frozen in surprise. Within its ivory silk lining, the Ashworth emeralds coiled in their ancient splendor, but with one crucial alteration that made my blood run cold. The great central stone, the legendary serpent's eye, was gone, leaving a gaping void in the heart of the necklace. Pinned to the silk with a brass tack was another card in that now familiar, elegant script. "The body is returned, but the eye sees all. Let those who have lived in darkness prepare for illumination. The final revelation awaits sunset." A friend. Mrs. Ashworth stood transfixed before the mutilated necklace, her iron composure finally cracking under the weight of this psychological torment. "This is monstrous," she whispered. "To return what was taken, only to take what matters most." Poirot examined the box with his customary precision, noting details that escaped the rest of us. "Observe, mes amis, the indentation where the great emerald rested. It is deeper at one edge, the mark of a setting that has been disturbed, perhaps altered, at some point in its history." He lifted the brass tack delicately, studying it in the morning light. "And this tack bears traces of furniture polish, but not the common variety used throughout this house. Something finer, more specialized." Dr. Whitfield, who had been hovering nervously near Miss Catherine, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Monsieur Poirot, there are matters concerning the family that perhaps should be discussed privately. The newspaper threat suggests someone possesses information that could destroy reputations built over generations." "Indeed, Doctor. But first, let us consider why our theatrical friend chose to return the necklace in this particular manner." Poirot's pale green eyes swept the assembled company with scientific precision. The emeralds themselves were never the true prize. They were merely the bait to draw our attention while more significant treasures were secured. As if summoned by his words, Inspector Frobisher, arrived from the market town, his practical face bearing news that would reshape our understanding of the entire affair. "I've had word from London about your Mr. Crane," he announced. "Clean alibi for the crucial periods, never left his hotel, witnessed by staff and guests alike. We're releasing him immediately." The implication struck the company like a physical blow. If Crane was innocent, then the true orchestrator of this elaborate charade remained among us, hidden behind a mask of respectability and false concern. Miss Catherine, who had maintained her composure throughout the morning's revelations, finally spoke with quiet intensity. "Perhaps it's time we stopped pretending this family's reputation rests on anything more substantial than carefully maintained illusions." "Catherine!" Mrs. Ashworth's voice cracked like a whip, but her niece's intelligent eyes remained steady. "I've lived my entire life in the shadow of whispers and half-truths. Aunt Cordelia, if someone seeks to expose our family's secrets, perhaps we should face them with dignity rather than denial." Poirot studied this exchange with growing understanding. Mademoiselle speaks of shadows and whispers, the very currency of family secrets. Our mysterious friend operates not from greed, but from a sense of moral obligation, believing that truth long suppressed must finally be brought to light. He moved to the window, gazing out at the manicured grounds where peacocks strutted with imperial dignity. The theft was never about the emeralds themselves, but about what they represented, the visible symbol of a family's honor built upon foundations that perhaps would not bear close examination. Mr. Thornfield, who had been silent throughout the morning's proceedings, cleared his throat uncomfortably. If there are matters of family history that require discretion, I've long been a friend to the Ashworths. My resources could perhaps— "Your resources, monsieur, cannot alter what has already been set in motion," Poirot replied with gentle firmness. "Our serpent has demonstrated remarkable patience and planning. The systematic theft of documents, the violation of the church records, the theatrical return of the emeralds, all point to someone who values justice over profit, revelation over reward." As the morning progressed, it became increasingly clear that we were dealing with an adversary of unusual sophistication. The missing serpent's eye was not merely a trophy, but a symbol, the all-seeing eye that would witness the final revelation of truth. "Tonight," Poirot announced as the grandfather clock chimed the noon hour, "I shall gather you all in the library for what I believe will be our final conference. Our friend has promised illumination at sunset, and I suspect they intend to keep that promise in a manner that will surprise us all." The household dispersed uneasily, each member lost in private calculations of guilt and consequence. As the afternoon shadows began to lengthen across Thornfield Park, I could not shake the feeling that we were approaching the climax of a drama that had been years in the making, a reckoning with the past that would determine not just the fate of the Ashworth family, but the very nature of truth itself. The serpent's coil was tightening, and somewhere in this house of secrets, a patient adversary was preparing for the final act of their carefully orchestrated revelation. The eye that had been taken would indeed see all, and what it revealed would test every carefully maintained facade in this elegant prison of respectability and lies. The afternoon shadows lengthened across Thornfield Park with the deliberate inevitability of a curtain falling on the final act. I found Poirot in the library at 4:30, arranging chairs in his characteristic semicircle with mathematical precision. Every angle was calculated, every sight line considered, as if the very geometry of the room would compel truth from its hiding places. "The stage must be perfect, Hastings," he murmured, adjusting the final chair by mere inches. "Tonight, we witness not merely the solution to a crime, but the culmination of a moral drama that has been years in the making." Upon the mantelpiece, he had positioned the mutilated Ashworth necklace, its missing center stone creating a void that seemed to watch over the proceedings like a cyclops' eye. The empty setting caught the lamplight with an almost accusatory gleam, a constant reminder of what had been taken and what remained hidden. The household gathered with the reluctant gravity of mourners attending a funeral they had long dreaded. Mrs. Ashworth entered with her iron composure intact but visibly strained, while Miss Catherine maintained her quiet dignity despite the pallor that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting anxiety. Dr. Whitfield hovered protectively near her, his nervous energy more pronounced than ever, his hand occasionally reaching toward his pocket watch in that familiar gesture of distress. The Pembertons arrived together, their faces bearing the haunted expression of people who had glimpsed the abyss of scandal and found it staring back. Mr. Thornfield, as host, attempted to maintain an air of gracious concern, though his hands trembled slightly as he poured brandy for the gentlemen. The vicar clutched his leather-bound register as if it were a shield against the revelations to come. It was then that Sebastian Crane made his entrance, returned from his brief incarceration with the pale dignity of the wrongly accused. He bowed to Mrs. Ashworth with careful formality, his voice carrying the brittle edge of injured pride. "I am exonerated, madam. Perhaps now the real culprit will be sought with equal vigor." Poirot inclined his head without apology. "Your inconvenience was regrettable, Monsieur Crane. But innocence, however inconvenient, is often its own proof." The effect of Crane's return rippled through the assembled company like a stone cast into still water. If the obvious suspect was innocent, then the true orchestrator of this elaborate charade remained among them, hidden behind a mask of respectability and false concern. "Before we commence," Poirot announced, his voice carrying easily across the hushed room, "I must ask each of you to handle this necklace, not as evidence, but as memory, as symbol, as the weight of family honor made manifest." One by one, they approached the mantelpiece. Mrs. Ashworth lifted the damaged necklace with the dignity of a queen touching a crown too long worn, her fingers briefly caressing the empty setting where the serpent's eye should have rested. Mr. Pemberton grasped it as if it might bite, while his wife stroked the remaining stones with a convulsive tenderness that spoke of dreams deferred and aspirations crushed. Dr. Whitfield barely touched the golden chain, withdrawing as if scorched by its implications. Miss Catherine held it longest, weighing it in her hands with the careful attention of one who understood both its beauty and its burden. When she returned it to the tray, her fingers lingered a fraction upon the clasp, an infinitesimal hesitation that Poirot observed with scientific precision. "Mademoiselle," he said softly, "you observed something about the clasp?" "It has been altered," she replied evenly. "Long ago?" "Just so." Poirot nodded, making a careful notation in his leather book. He began his exposition with characteristic method. "From the beginning, this case has presented peculiarities that distinguished it from common theft. The theatrical notes, the systematic violation of family records, the careful timing of each revelation, all pointed to a mind that valued justice over profit, truth over treasure." Our contemplation was shattered by a cry from the corridor. Young Henry burst into the library, his face white with panic. "Sir, there's smoke. By the west anteroom. Something's burning." We rushed to investigate, finding a thin thread of smoke curling from beneath a servant's door near Mrs. Ashworth's private sitting room. Jameson flung it open to reveal a hastily kindled fire upon the stone tiles, its flames consuming a bundle of papers with greedy tongues. Poirot moved with astonishing speed, snatching the topmost sheets from the flames with iron tongs and smothering them beneath a hearthrug. The acrid scent of scorched paper filled the small space as he examined what remained of the documents. "What have they burned?" Mrs. Ashworth whispered, her voice hollow with dread. "Documents that answer themselves by what remains," Poirot replied, lifting a charred fragment. Through the smoke-stained air, I glimpsed portions of text that made my blood run cold. "Gust 1895, issue, Cath," and lower, "Acno, ledge, father, not, wedlock." Collective gasp moved through the assembled company like wind through autumn leaves. Miss Catherine stood very straight, her chin raised with a pride that looked painfully like defiance, while Dr. Whitfield made a small sound that contained within it both the physician and the man. "Enough," Mrs. Ashworth said, her voice carrying the weariness of 30 years of careful deception. "If this must be faced, it will be faced." We returned to the library as the last light of day began to fade. Poirot directed the lamps to be dimmed, creating an atmosphere of theatrical intimacy that seemed to draw secrets from the shadows. "The stolen documents from Madame Ashworth's safe," he began quietly, "combined with the missing page from the parish register, tell a story that certain members of this family have spent 3 decades concealing. Miss Catherine is not the legitimate daughter of the late Mr. Ashworth, but rather the natural child of a liaison that would have caused considerable scandal in the social circles this family inhabited." The silence that followed was profound and terrible. Dr. Whitfield rose abruptly from his chair, his professional composure finally cracking under the weight of suppressed emotion. "I love her," he declared with desperate honesty. "I have loved her for years, watched her bear the burden of whispered speculation and half-truths with a grace that puts her so-called betters to shame. If someone seeks to destroy her reputation for the sake of some twisted sense of justice, they will answer to me first." Poirot studied the physician's passionate defense with growing understanding. "And therein, doctor, lies the heart of our mystery. For you see, mes amis, our serpent is motivated not by malice but by love, the love of someone who has watched injustice perpetuate itself through generations of silence and complicity." As if summoned by his words, the grandfather clock began to chime the hour of 6. The promised sunset was approaching, and with it, the final revelation that would expose not just family secrets, but the identity of the patient adversary who had orchestrated this elaborate moral drama. "Our criminal possesses intimate knowledge of this household," Poirot continued, his pale green eyes moving methodically from face to face. "Access to its most private spaces, and the patience to orchestrate a campaign of psychological pressure spanning several days. They understand that truth revealed gradually carries more weight than truth proclaimed suddenly." The last rays of sunlight slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the Persian carpet. Somewhere in the house, a bell chimed once. Perhaps a servant's signal, perhaps something more deliberate. From the corridor beyond came the softest of footfalls. A shadow crossed the threshold, a figure no more than a darker patch against the gathering dusk, and moved silently toward the mantelpiece where the damaged necklace lay. There was the faintest click of metal against metal, the whisper of careful movement, and then the shadow turned to withdraw. "Non," said Poirot, and that single syllable stopped the figure as surely as if a hand had seized their shoulder. "Jameson, the lights, if you please." The lamps blazed up, flooding the room with sudden brilliance. On the mantelpiece, in the empty setting where the serpent's eye had gaped like a wound, lay a glittering green stone, the great emerald, restored to its rightful place. Beside it, pinned with a brass tack that gleamed like truth itself, was a final card bearing the familiar, elegant script. "The serpent's true nature is revealed. Let those who have lived in darkness prepare for the light of justice. The eye sees all, and all shall be seen." The assembled company sat in stunned silence, staring at the restored necklace as if it were a resurrection made manifest. The serpent's eye blazed in the lamplight with its characteristic fire, but now it seemed less a jewel than a symbol, the all-seeing eye of justice that would witness the final revelation of truth. Poirot stood before them, his small figure commanding absolute attention. "Tomorrow, mes amis, when the morning light reveals all shadows, we shall discover who among us has played the role of moral serpent with such consummate skill. For now, the eye has returned to watch over us all, and what it has witnessed will soon be revealed in full." As the company began to disperse, murmuring uneasily among themselves, I could not shake the feeling that we had witnessed not an ending, but a transformation. The serpent had indeed shed its skin, and what was emerging promised to reshape not just the Ashworth family's carefully maintained facade, but the very foundations upon which their world was built. The final act was yet to come. But the stage was set, the players assembled, and truth itself waited in the wings for its moment of ultimate revelation. The morning of the final revelation dawned with crystalline clarity, as if the very atmosphere had been purged of deception during the night. I found Poirot in the library at precisely 8 o'clock, arranging chairs with mathematical precision, while the restored Ashworth emeralds lay upon the mantelpiece like a green fire that had finally ceased to smoulder with hidden secrets. The serpent's eye blazed in its proper setting, whole once more, yet somehow transformed by its brief absence into something that seemed to watch over the proceedings with ancient wisdom. "Today, Hastings," he announced without preamble, adjusting the final chair by mere millimeters, "we witness not merely the solution to a crime, but the resolution of a moral drama that has been 30 years in the making. The serpent has indeed shed its skin, and what emerges will surprise even those who believe they knew the truth." The household assembled with the reluctant gravity of souls approaching judgment. Mrs. Ashworth entered with her iron composure, intact but visibly strained, while Miss Catherine maintained her quiet dignity despite the pallor that spoke of sleepless nights. Dr. Whitfield hovered protectively near her, his nervous energy more pronounced than ever, though I detected beneath his familiar anxiety something that looked remarkably like resolution. The remaining wedding guests took their appointed places. The Pembertons huddled together in mutual apprehension, Mr. Thornfield attempting to maintain his role as gracious host despite the tremor in his hands, and the vicar clutching his leather-bound register as if it were a shield against revelations yet to come. Poirot surveyed the assembled company with the measured gaze of a conductor preparing to lead a complex symphony. "Mes amis, I promised you illumination, and illumination you shall have. But first, permit me to reconstruct for you the true nature of this most unusual crime." He lifted the restored necklace, letting it catch the morning light in cascades of emerald fire. The theft of the Ashworth emeralds was never about the jewels themselves, but about what they represented, the visible symbol of a family's honor built upon foundations that would not bear close examination. Our criminal was motivated not by greed, but by love, not by malice, but by justice long deferred. The methodical revelation. Poirot's pale green eyes settled first upon the obvious suspects, systematically eliminating each false lead with surgical precision. Monsieur Crane possessed the tools of his trade and the knowledge of a dealer, but lacked the intimate understanding of this household's routines and secrets. His arrest was convenient, but incorrect, a red herring that served our true criminal's purposes admirably. He moved to examine the mahogany box once more, his gloved fingers tracing the faint scratches that spoke of hasty opening. The notes left by our friend were written in an educated hand, but more importantly, they revealed a mind that thought in symbols and ceremonies. The brass tacks bore traces of a specialized furniture wax, not the common preparation used by household staff, but the finer compound employed by those who understand the care of precious objects. His gaze shifted to Dr. Whitfield, who stood frozen like a man watching his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. Physician, doctor, has access to every corner of a household. He comes and goes at all hours, is trusted with the most intimate family secrets, and observes human nature in its most vulnerable moments. More than this, he possesses the patience to orchestrate a campaign spanning days rather than minutes. The heart of truth. Poirot approached the window, gazing out at the manicured grounds where morning mist still clung to the ancient oaks. In the summer of 1895, a young physician newly established in Hampshire fell, deeply in love, The object of his affection was a woman of superior social station, beautiful and intelligent, but trapped by the conventions of her time and class. Their liaison was brief but passionate, and when it ended, she carried within her the proof of their forbidden love. The silence in the library was absolute, broken only by the soft whisper of Miss Catherine's sharply drawn breath. The woman was Miss Elizabeth Ashworth, sister to the late master of this house. When her condition became apparent, arrangements were made with characteristic Victorian efficiency. She would marry hastily to preserve appearances. The child would be acknowledged as legitimate, and the truth would be buried beneath layers of respectability and carefully falsified documentation. Dr. Whitfield's professional composure finally cracked, 30 years of suppressed emotion overwhelming his practiced reserve. "I could not forget," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I watched from a distance as my daughter grew up believing herself the legitimate heir to a name that was never truly hers. I watched as whispers and speculation followed her through society, watched as she bore the burden of half-truths and carefully maintained lies." Miss Catherine turned toward him with dawning understanding, her intelligent eyes reflecting a terrible comprehension of what was being revealed. "Papa?" The word emerged as barely more than a breath, carrying within it 30 years of unconscious longing. The systematic execution. Poirot continued his methodical exposition, each detail falling into place with clockwork precision. The emeralds themselves became a symbol of this deception. Years ago, when questions arose about Miss Catherine's legitimacy, the Great Serpent's Eye was subtly modified, its setting altered to allow removal by someone with intimate knowledge of the mechanism. This was done ostensibly for cleaning and maintenance, but in reality to conceal any markings that might have provided inconvenient evidence. He gestured toward the restored necklace. Dr. Whitfield discovered this modification during one of his many visits to the household. Perhaps Miss Catherine's mother, in her final illness, revealed the secret. Perhaps he observed it during some family crisis when the emeralds were examined. Regardless, he possessed the knowledge necessary to remove and replace the central stone at will. Mrs. Ashworth's face had become a mask of marble, but her eyes betrayed the terrible weight of secrets finally exposed to light. "The theft was elaborate theater," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weariness of decades spent maintaining impossible facades. "Every detail calculated to force us toward this moment." "Précisément, madame," Poirot replied with gentle understanding. Dr. Whitfield orchestrated each revelation with the precision of a master dramatist. The theft occurred during moments when his medical duties provided perfect alibis, attending to Miss Catherine's faintness, consulting with other guests about their health, moving freely through the house as only a trusted family physician could. The final truth. Dr. Whitfield stepped forward, his nervous demeanor replaced by quiet dignity. "I could not watch her suffer any longer," he said, his gaze never leaving Catherine's face. "The whispers, the speculation, the burden of living with half-truths, it was destroying you by degrees, my dear one. You deserve to know your true parentage, to understand that you are the daughter of love rather than duty, of passion rather than social arrangement." The morning sun had climbed higher, filling the library with golden light that seemed to transform the assembled figures into players in some ancient morality tale. Miss Catherine moved toward Dr. Whitfield with trembling steps, her hands reaching out to touch the face she had known all her life, but never truly seen. "All these years," she breathed, "all these years you watched over me, cared for me, protected me from a distance." "From the moment you drew breath," he confirmed, his voice thick with emotion long suppressed. "You are my daughter, my pride, my greatest joy, and I could not bear to see you diminished by secrets that were never yours to carry." Resolution and justice. As father and daughter embraced for the first time with full knowledge of their relationship, Poirot quietly gathered the restored necklace. The serpent's eye caught the light one final time, its depths seeming to hold all the complexity of human love and sacrifice. Mrs. Ashworth rose from her chair with the dignity of a queen acknowledging defeat. "Jameson," she said to the butler, her voice formal as prayer, "ring for the household, then fetch my writing case. We shall prepare a statement acknowledging Miss Catherine as the natural daughter of Dr. Marcus Whitfield. The Ashworths will ask forgiveness for the deception and make what reparation we can." The transformation in the room was immediate and profound. The weight of 30 years of lies seemed to lift like morning mist, replaced by something that felt remarkably like peace. Dr. Whitfield swayed slightly, as a man who has carried a burden so long he distrusts the sudden lightness. Inspector Frobisher, who had arrived quietly during the final revelations, cleared his throat with obvious discomfort. "Given the return of all property and the unusual nature of the motive, I am content with cautions," he muttered. "Mind you, Doctor, do not make me regret this decision." Poirot's final reflection. As the company began to disperse, murmuring softly among themselves with the hushed tones of those who have witnessed something profound, Poirot remained by the mantelpiece. He adjusted his tie with characteristic precision, then turned to address the room one final time. "You observe, mes amis, how the restoration of truth brings not destruction, but healing. Our friend was indeed a friend, to justice, to love, and to the proposition that human dignity requires honesty above all else." He smiled with gentle satisfaction. The serpent has shed its skin, and what emerges is not the monster of scandal, but the beauty of truth acknowledged and love finally free to speak its name. The Ashworth emeralds would continue to grace family brides, but now they would carry a different legacy, not the weight of hidden shame, but the promise that truth, however long delayed, will always find a way to shine with its own pure light. The serpent's eye had indeed seen all, and in seeing, had finally set them free. As we prepared to take our leave of Thornfield Park, I reflected upon the curious nature of justice, how it sometimes requires the commission of a crime to prevent a greater wrong, how love can be the most formidable detective of all, and how even the most carefully constructed lies must eventually yield to the patient persistence of truth. The wedding guests who had come to celebrate love and tradition had witnessed something far more precious, the restoration of a family torn apart by the cruel conventions of respectability and the triumph of authentic human connection over the hollow symbols of social position. In the end, that seemed a far more fitting celebration than any ceremony could provide. The morning after the great revelation dawned with the peculiar clarity that follows a storm, when the air itself seems purged of deception. I found Poirot in the library at precisely 8 o'clock, arranging his leather notebook with characteristic precision while the restored Ashworth emeralds blazed upon the mantelpiece like a green fire that had finally ceased to smolder with hidden secrets. The household moved with a different rhythm now. Servants spoke in normal tones rather than whispers, and the oppressive weight of unspoken accusations had lifted like morning mist. Mrs. Ashworth, her iron composure intact, but somehow softened, had already dispatched a carefully worded statement to the London papers, acknowledging Miss Catherine as Dr. Whitfield's natural daughter, with the dignity that transforms potential scandal into family honor restored. "The truth," she observed to Poirot as they reviewed the announcement, "proves less destructive than 30 years of careful lies. Perhaps we should have trusted in it from the beginning." Miss Catherine, or Miss Whitfield as she would now be known, sat beside her father with the quiet radiance of one who has finally discovered her true place in the world. The nervous energy that had characterized Dr. Whitfield for decades had evaporated, replaced by the calm authority of a man who had set down a burden carried too long. His hand no longer sought his pocket watch in that familiar gesture of anxiety. Instead, he possessed the stillness of one who had found peace. I orchestrated each revelation with the precision of a medical procedure. he confessed to Poirot. The theft, the notes, even the newspaper threat, all carefully calculated to create the pressure necessary for truth to emerge. I could not watch my daughter suffer any longer under the weight of whispered speculation and half-truths. The practical arrangements flowed with surprising efficiency. Mrs. Ashworth's financial settlements would ensure Catherine's security, while her legitimization as Dr. Whitfield's daughter actually enhanced rather than diminished her social position. The Pembertons discovered their son's marriage had elevated him even further than initially understood, while the wedding itself would proceed with renewed meaning, a celebration not just of love, but of truth acknowledged. Sebastian Crane departed with his dignity restored and his reputation cleared, though he carried new understanding of human complexity. "I collect beautiful objects," he remarked to Poirot. "But you, monsieur, collect beautiful truths. I suspect your collection is ultimately more valuable." The vicar prepared to restore the missing page to the parish register, but with corrections reflecting newly acknowledged realities. "Truth recorded in God's house," he murmured, "cannot be altered by man's pride, but it can be corrected when pride yields to honesty." Inspector Frobisher, after consultation with local magistrates, determined that the return of all property and the unanimous desire to avoid prosecution made formal charges inadvisable. "Mind you, Doctor," he warned, "this sort of theatrical justice-seeking cannot become habit. The law exists for good reason." As the various guests prepared their departures, each carried something different from what they had brought. A new understanding of the complex motivations that drive human behavior, the recognition that even the most carefully constructed facades must eventually yield to patient truth. Mr. Thornfield, as host, seemed almost relieved that his perfect house party had concluded with revelation rather than ruin. "Perhaps," he reflected, "the finest hospitality involves providing guests with exactly what they need, even when they are unaware of needing it." As our own departure approached, Poirot stood before the restored necklace one final time. The serpent's eye blazed in its proper setting, transformed by its brief absence into something that seemed to watch over the proceedings with ancient wisdom. "You observe, Hastings," he said, adjusting his tie with characteristic precision, "how the most complex crimes often spring from the simplest human emotions. Love, in this case, the love of a father for his daughter, and his unwillingness to watch her suffer for the sins of others." Mrs. Ashworth approached to bid us farewell, taking Poirot's hands in both of hers. "You have undone a terrible knot with the least possible violence," she said. "I shall be grateful all my days." "Madame," Poirot replied with gentle dignity, "it was you who untied it. I merely pointed to the cord that must be pulled. To protect with lies is like sweeping dust beneath a Persian carpet. One day the carpet is beautiful only when you do not walk upon it." As our motor appeared on the gravel drive, the grandfather clock chimed the hour with resonant finality. The serpent had indeed shed its skin, and what emerged was not the monster of scandal that Victorian society so feared, but the beauty of authentic human connection restored to its proper place. "The wedding guests who all lied?" I asked as we settled into our seats. Poirot smiled with satisfaction. "They lied, yes. Some from vanity, some from fear, some to spare another a hurt they could not bear. Today they begin with a smaller lie, that they will never lie again. It is progress, mon ami. The little grey cells prefer a world with fewer grand gestures and more quiet truths." As we drove through the autumn countryside, I reflected that we had witnessed not merely the solution to a crime, but the triumph of truth over the elaborate fictions that so often pass for respectability. The emeralds would grace future brides, but now they would carry a different legacy, not the weight of hidden shame, but the promise that truth, however long delayed, will always find a way to shine with its own pure light. The case of the wedding guests who all lied had concluded not with punishment, but with redemption, and perhaps that was the most fitting resolution of all.